Now, I just want to preface this by saying that I have nothing against AuthorTubers in general. I myself have offered writing advice based on my own experience and what I've read, and I follow multiple channels whose advice has helped me. That said, I do want to address a few things. This is the internet, and while platforms like YouTube have allowed everyone to have a voice, there is an obvious downside. For one thing, there's no vetting process. Those who excel don't always have the best information. Instead, popular channels might feature someone who is charismatic, funny, or great at editing. All the big writing channels have perfect lighting and writers who are good at talking. Now, this isn't to say those authors aren't giving out good advice. Like I said, I've made changes to my own work after listening to advice on here, which I still feel were for the better. For example, when Jenna Morisi pointed out that a lot of stories featured an abusive father, I edited my own story to have an evil aunt instead. It wasn't a huge change, but anything I can do to make my story less cliché is a plus. People have critiqued Jenna, but I have found her advice can help with addressing obvious mistakes, especially when she discusses things from a reader's perspective, noting tropes that she's sick of seeing, mostly because of how overdone they are. All in all, I support AuthorTubers giving advice, but wanted to acknowledge that there are certain risks. I received one nasty comment on an earlier video which said that I was dangerous, and the commenter in question likened my advice to giving out Tide Pods. I don't think bad advice, at least as it relates to writing, has ever killed anybody or literally endangered their life, but if you can give me an example, I'd be curious to hear it. In the video I posted, I suggested that hiring an editor might not be the best option for all writers, mainly because it's not something that's affordable for everybody. In the video, I noted that I still wanted to hire an editor because I believe in what they do, and I heard from dozens of people, editors included, who agreed with me. Out of thousands of people, only one person considered me dangerous, seeing himself as smarter than everyone else who watched that video, including an author who had published 7 books and was doing well. I bring this up, though, because I thought the commenter raised a valid issue, though certainly he could have been much more civil about it. Namely, that's whether or not AuthorTube is dangerous, or at least if it can be dangerous. To answer that question, I've identified 4 potential risks for those who both share and listen to the information that's offered here. I will say that going forward, I'll try to be transparent. I'll be honest about what my qualifications are and where I'm coming from, because I don't want anyone to take my advice as gospel, especially since advice that works for one person might not work for another. In doing your research as a writer, you should always consult multiple sources and mediums. However, before we dive into the 4 concerns I have, I'm Riley and this is Otherworldly Fiction. On this channel, I rant about books, share my bookish opinions, and offer the occasional writing advice. If that sounds like your cup of tea, hit that subscribe button. Without further ado, let's dive into the potential problems. The most obvious problem, of course, is the risk for misinformation to be spread. As others have said in blogs and articles, you can end up with a case of the blind leading the blind. You have tips being shared from people who have never completed a manuscript, or who have never published, but they'll amass thousands of followers and become recognized as an authority figure. The trouble, though, is that it's hard to say what is misinformation, since the writing industry is one of those which changes so quickly. If I said point blank that you should never get your book edited, that would be bad information, since many books have benefited from editing. with readers noticing when books, including those which have been traditionally published, have skimmed over this part of the process. However, if I say that editing won't be for everyone, because that person is just writing for fun, is simply looking to crank out something fluffy, or that traditional publishers will hire one for you, that wouldn't be inaccurate. There was one writer who cranked out 17 romance books in a year and made healthy sales. Obviously, she wasn't writing the next great work, and personally, I don't think every writer needs to. In my opinion, there's a place for both deep literary work and mindless entertainment. As someone who has enjoyed both Middlemarch and The Selection, I appreciate both, and don't disparage any writer for choosing to write in either category. At any rate, the author in question, self-publishing her work, didn't say anything about spending $30,000 on editors. She certainly could have, but she would have been applying edits every other week, and it seems odd that a writer would leave such a big expenditure out of her story. Just based on the sheer volume of work she created, I doubt she hired an editor for her 17 books, but much as people hate to hear it, she did well. The point being that advice that applies to one person might not apply to another, though there is advice, if given without context or elaboration, which could be harmful as a whole. Most people who give advice offer a caveat, and that one approach isn't best for all writers. While there are those who prefer self-publishing and others who stand by traditional, few will declare that one is better than the other. While I plan to self-publish, I acknowledge that traditional publishing could be and is better for other writers. It depends on what you're writing, as well as who you are and what you're willing to sacrifice, as both approaches come with their pros and cons. If you're giving advice on the publishing industry itself and don't have personal experience, that could be an issue, especially if you're telling writers they don't need to self-edit their work before they submit it, or that publishers don't care about genre conventions. Because they do. If you say that writers looking to traditionally publish don't need an agent, again, that could be erroneous. Though I don't know, since I see some websites accept unsolicited manuscripts while others refuse them. In giving my advice, I don't discuss agents or traditional publishing as a whole because I wouldn't know what I'm talking about. This isn't to say you can't do research, but the trouble comes when writers, including those with big followings, don't take their time to do their homework. Most of my advice comes from observation and what I've read, though it's possible that I, in turn, have repeated advice which itself was bad, or that I delivered it in a way that removed the original context or skewed what the first writer meant to say. Certainly, I don't expect perfection, and it's my belief that all advice you hear on here should be taken with a grain of salt. The danger comes when a writer decides to listen to one person, but in videos going forward, I want to stress the importance of consulting multiple sources and considering various viewpoints before committing to anything. This brings me to my second point. Sometimes advice isn't bad so much as it's contradictory. Read enough blogs on writing and you'll notice a pattern. People disagree. Some swear by pantsing, while others stress that you must have an outline, no matter what type of writer you are. There are those who disparage self-publishing, seeing those who do so as lazy, while others take a hard stance against traditional publishing, likening it to gatekeeping. You'll see writers offering advice on how to make your book more marketable, including adding conventional tropes and commercial elements to your work, while others still will say that you should write what you're passionate about, first and foremost, and fight the temptation to be more commercial. There are people who write lavish literary work, who swear by cutting all the that's, and treat passive prose like it's the next plague. You'll have advice steering you away from purple prose, which includes flowery descriptions, big adjectives, and a slower pace. If you look at a checklist of writing rules, you'll realize that writers like Anne Rice and Angela Carter have broken every single one, yet they're considered great writers and have dedicated followings. I've spoken to friends who said they like purple prose. As a reader, I myself love gorgeous language because it allows me to picture what's happening. Writing advice will tell you not to describe what your character looks like. But speaking as a reader, I get frustrated if an author can't give me something, whether that's hair color, head shape, or skin tone. I appreciate writers like Anne Rice who describe every inch of their characters because I can clearly picture the protagonist, which in turn allows me to connect with them. Advice can be contradictory because everyone, readers included, wants something different. And what's offensive to one reader will be sought out by another. In other words, there's no piece of advice that's going to fit every writer. Several factors, including reader preference, genre conventions, and the writer's style, are going to affect how a book is received. Most of the advice given is valid, but a writer has to sort through it because not everything is going to work for you. And rules, in many cases, should be treated as guidelines instead, especially if the writer in question has some experience. One of the most controversial aspects of AuthorTube is the fact that some writers fail terribly. Their work might be mediocre at best or awful at worst, and they're scrutinized that much more because of how knowledgeable they've made themselves out to be. It stands to reason that if you're giving out writing advice, you're going to follow it. If you tell people to get a line editor and then publish a book with run-on sentences and poor grammar, that's not a good look. Of course, I don't think the writers who end up in these situations necessarily set out to scam people. In most cases, it's likely they are genuinely passionate about writing, and when it comes to starting an account to promote themselves, many blogs will suggest giving advice as one idea. Moreover, anyone in marketing will encourage you to build a following before you've completed anything, so that there's an audience waiting when you release something. In addition to platforms like YouTube or TikTok, prospective writers will create websites and mailing lists. From a marketing perspective, it makes sense. If you want people to buy your work, you want to be seen as an authority. The problem comes when the experience doesn't match what you're being pressed to portray. It's said that you have to write 1 million words of garbage before you can produce something decent. And if you release a book with no prior practice, it's probably not going to be great. Unfortunately, if you've painted yourself as this writing guru and expert author, that's what people will expect. And in time, that can backfire. Writers in both self-publishing and traditional are feeling pressure to release their work at a rapid-fire pace, which includes getting their debut out of the way. This is tragic, though, because writers are being asked to advertise themselves as the next Stephen King, with their first books being compared with those written by writers with decades of experience. I'm not saying writers shouldn't market themselves or build a following beforehand, but it can lead to a lack of trust when expectations fall short. For my part, I plan to consult beta readers, do a beta release on Wattpad, and if I can afford it, hire an editor. I'm no expert and don't presume to be, But more writers, in my opinion, should take their time. After all, if you do develop the following and are even making money from your YouTube channel, there's no reason to rush. Some books are time sensitive, but the best ones will be just as readable 10 years from now. Books from the 50s are still being read today because they took their time. Tolkien spent more than a decade perfecting Lord of the Rings, and it remains widely read. This pressure to release immediately is toxic in that it places pressure on writers and creates distrust in readers when they fail to deliver. In my opinion, there's something to be said for slowing down. But platforms like AuthorTube can be detrimental if they lead the writer to publish first and practice second. Finally, you have a potentially toxic environment. This is by no means limited to AuthorTube or even writing, but it's no secret that controversies have become common and feuds normal. People watch scandals on X, formerly known as Twitter, like they're a soap opera. Every day, you hear about the latest authors to earn the label of problematic, and many, whether their opinions are right or wrong, show a striking lack of professionalism. Personally, I have no problem with people disagreeing on something, but what's being lost is the respect. When someone voiced a differing opinion, people used to literally say, "I respectfully disagree." Now, they accuse you of endangering children or killing people. They might even share your address or threaten to kill you because you voiced an opinion that wasn't theirs. And it baffles me that this is seen as okay. Writers have fallen into the trap of tearing each other down, either out of a sense of justice or, more maliciously, because they know they'll get high views. Ripping other writers apart is low-hanging fruit. But writers and readers will engage in the act of dogpiling because it makes them feel good, and because they see themselves as heroes battling a villain, instead of as complicated human beings engaging with another person who has their own feelings and lived experiences. One AuthorTuber referred to the work of another writer as poop because she didn't like what the other author said. And wrong or not, her need to say anything at all, especially in that manner, struck me as very unprofessional. Then there's the current phenomenon in which writers review bomb each other. Not only is this unprofessional, it's libel, which is actually like doxing a punishable offense. When you look at the way some writers are treating each other, it's a wonder more people aren't being sued, because people are not only threatening others, but spreading misinformation about them. All in all, AuthorTube can just feel very toxic, even for some writers unsafe. YouTubers have been forced to leave the platform because of one awkwardly worded tweet that was taken out of context. Forced to choose between keeping their careers or preserving their mental health, they often opt, understandably so, for the latter option. To date, I've only received one really nasty comment, and even after bracing myself for such comments, it hit hard. For a week, I felt like there was a cloud hanging over me. Throughout the day, no matter how I tried to distract myself, I'd think about the comment. That shit lives in your head rent-free, whether you want it to or not. And I wasted hours thinking about retorts, questioning myself, and during my worst moments, I considered quitting YouTube. If one comment can affect someone that greatly, you can imagine what 50 or 100 comments like that would do to a person. I'm hoping that we're starting to move away from this fixation on negativity. While some writers have done terrible things, I would love to see more videos that uplift authors people actually love, including those readers or writers might feel have been underappreciated. We should be able to disagree without trying to hurt others. And we should foster an environment where writers can feel heard and safe. Overall, I support AuthorTube. It offers a great opportunity for writers to connect directly with potential readers. And some of the biggest names, such as Brandon Sanderson, use the platform, sharing advice, insights, and updates on their work. For writers who might have gone unseen before, AuthorTube is an excellent vehicle for breaking through. That said, while I follow AuthorTubers and support the work they do, I must acknowledge that there are potential risks. As a writer looking for advice, you should never rely on one source. Writers need to cherry-pick the information which works best for them. Moreover, writers should support each other. It can be tempting to weigh in on a controversy, to give yourself clout, but if you're looking to do good, you could earn just as many views promoting the works you loved or the authors you feel deserve more attention. These issues also extend to BookTube and the larger reading community. While authors can face everything from bad advice to a toxic environment, readers are likewise forced to contend with certain issues, among them subtle sexism, which I address in the video on the left. As always, thanks for watching and happy writing.